Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Uh, okay. Hello, everybody. Again, thank you all so much for spending time with me today. For the next 75 minutes, we're going to talk about 5 tips to teach elementary students to write complete sentences. Again, my name's Sean Datchuk. That's my email address, and that's also my Twitter handle. So if you're on there, feel free to give me a follow. I post different things on there related to free resources regarding student literacy, particularly writing. This is the agenda that we have today. So I'll do a brief introduction. I'll talk about sentence writing, and then how that interacts overall with what we know about student writing development. And then from there, we'll start to really drill down on what are different tips that you can do starting this afternoon, even if some of y'all are working extended school year or summer school. What are some tips that you can immediately implement to help students learn how to write what can seem like a simple thing, but it's actually very complicated, which would be complete sentence writing. And then we'll look at ways that we can assess for sentence writing. So, what are things that we can look at on universal screeners or progress monitors, progress monitoring tasks, etc. So, before we get too much further, there's a QR code right here. And so, if you use that, hold up your smartphone, take a picture. I also, in the chat, dropped a tiny URL down there. If you click on that, that will take you to a Google Drive folder. It'll not only have today's presentation, which is also posted on the patent website, it'll also have these supplemental items that I'll reference. So it'll have different scoring rules. It'll have a research article that I recently published with some colleagues in teaching exceptional children that I've posted on there. If you have any time, I'd encourage you to go ahead and take a look at that Google Drive folder. Okay. So again, my name's Sean Datchuk. I am an associate professor of special education here at the University of Iowa. Starting July 1st, I have the pleasure of serving as the next director of the Iowa Reading Research Center. And I've been here. This is my 10th year, so I've been here a decade, which makes me a native Iowan, I think. My wife and I have two boys born in Iowa, a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. Our 7-year-old just graduated first grade. So we had, he's quick to tell people he had 3 popsicles at a celebration. So I was still very excited about that. But before I was a faculty member, I was also a elementary educator, also a K-12 special educator, and a director of special education. And one of the reasons why I have focused in on sentence writing is, to be blunt, I really struggled to teach writing. So all the way from elementary to middle to high school, if I were to give students, let's say, a writing prompt, and just gave them a brief amount of time, students could generate some really wonderful ideas, but unfortunately, it might be in one long run-on sentence or several short, choppy sentences. And that, again, that was from elementary, middle through high school. And then, so I'd like to, during this presentation, I'd like you to sort of think in your mind's eye about perhaps one, if not several students that you work with that would display some similar difficulties. So I said, as a teacher, I can't be alone in this. When I went to pull evidence-based curriculum materials from my teacher shelf, my reading shelf, there were some things, my math shelf, there were some things, my writing shelf was pretty bare. So I've made it my professional mission here as a faculty member, now director, to figure out what are different evidence-based curriculum materials, instructional techniques, assessment techniques that I can put directly in teachers' hands to help them. So I'm excited to share what I've been working on and researching over the past decade with you. So the first thing we're going to look at would be sentence writing. So when we talk about sentence writing, I like to think of it as occurring in these 2 larger buckets. So the first one would be text writing, and the second would be sentence structure. So that first bucket, text writing, that refers to when students write multiple words that follow rules of syntax or grammar or semantics. So when we string together multiple words into a sentence. So my son, he created in first grade, like a lot of first grade students, they'll create different lists of things that they like. He said that he liked his family, one, and that he also liked tacos, which would be the second. So I'm very happy that made it up there with tacos. But that would be text writing. So just the fact that he was stringing together these multiple words that flowed together, that followed rules of standard grammar and that express meaning. Two is that there would be sentence structure, so that these multiple words would be connected into a structure that made sense to readers. So at its basis of a basic form of a sentence structure would be simple sentence, which we can think of as having at least one subject, one verb, a capital letter to start and end punctuation. And then it could get more complicated, certainly. There can be compound sentences, complex, etc. Um, Sentence writing tends to gradually develop. So when students first enter elementary grades, we think that as students are picking up these critical aspects of early literacy, they are latching on to these smaller skills that they're going to need to be able to write complete sentences. So, for instance, here is a Common Core standard, second grade. By the end of second grade, we expect students to be able to produce, expand, and rearrange complete simple and compound sentences. So here would be an example from a first grade student. So if I were stuck in a snow globe, I would build a snowman with my family. So you can see there's definitely some application of letter sound knowledge into learning how to spell these words. Completely appropriate for an elementary grade student. But if you notice, so this first grade student's really latching on to that standard structure, and that's really exciting. So the fact that sentence and these sentence skills gradually develop, I think, is really crystal clear in sort of what this sentence would look like. So it isn't an automatically complete, accurate sentence, but that doesn't prevent this first grader and many first graders from picking up the basic building blocks of sentence structure as they're picking up on such things as spelling. Unfortunately, what we know is that many students can run into sentence writing difficulties. So it's common. It's common that as students in early elementary grades start to pick up sentence writings, like that first grader on the last slide, as they acquire more and more skills, some of those sentence errors, spelling errors, capitalization errors should start to fall off. But what we know is that for a cluster of students, those difficulties will persist, particularly for those with disabilities. Unfortunately, students might be able to write more, but the accuracy may remain low. And if we were to take out a magnifying glass to look at the writing samples of students, in this case, students with disabilities, what we would see would be several issues, unfortunately. One would be writing output. So, unfortunately, students with disabilities tend to write fewer words, sentences, etc., than students without disabilities. Specifically focusing on today, we also would see issues with sentence writing fluency. So, sentence writing fluency refers to the skill of writing accurately and also efficiently, so with some speed. And, you know, you don't have to be a super fast writer to display sentence writing fluency. You just need to have some accuracy, some speed, because it's important to overall writing development. So let's unpack the simple view of writing. So the simple view of writing can be conceptualized into these three larger categories to where we have transcription, text generation, self-regulation, and these three categories, these three broad skill areas are all competing for memory resources. So transcription refers to the handwriting, typing of individual letters, and spelling of individual words. So that's transcription. As students develop those transcription skills, they use that to engage in text generation. So this is to where they are writing multiple or typing or writing multiple words into phrases, sentences, paragraphs that express meaning to readers. So that would be text generation. And then finally, we tend to engage, and students tend to engage in self-regulation during the writing process. So you may have been writing emails this morning, and chances are when you open up that email, you had an idea or a goal on what you wanted to express. And then you would start engaging in text writing, but you just wouldn't usually just write it all and then hit send. I've done that before. I've usually gotten into trouble for those instances. But what usually happens is that we tend to self-regulate. So we start off with a goal, we start to write, and then during writing, we tend to engage in this stopping and starting to where we're stopping and sort of thinking like, okay, is this saying what I wanted to say? I'm uh, I tend to use way too many exclamation marks. So I have to usually pause and go, is this too many? Is six exclamation marks for six sentences too much? So we tend to engage in self-regulation where we're constantly checking back to the goals, we're engaging in writing, we're editing. And all of these three areas are all competing for, unfortunately, a finite amount of memory resources. So, as one of these areas develop proficiency, so let's say text generation, let's say if students have a fluent understanding of sentence structure to where they do not have to actively pay attention to whether or not, oh, is this a complete sentence? Am I missing a noun, a verb? So, if they do not have to do that, that gets committed to long-term memory. So, sentence structure gets committed to long-term memory. And that frees up cognitive resources, working memory resources for them to pay attention to these other aspects of writing. So the juicy parts of writing, such as words or vocabulary, or thinking about back to the what the overall goal of the writing of the writing task is, all those things. We want to preserve as much cognitive resources, as much memory as we can for students to pay attention to those things. So sentence writing fluency is a part of text generation that if we help students develop accuracy and speed with just here are the basic building blocks of a sentence, it should allow them to then pay attention to these other areas for development and use while they're writing. So this slide is just another way of saying it. They're fluent skills. So when proficient, transfer to long-term memory, more working memory resources are available. And what we see is an actual writing benefit. So this is what we think is happening within cognition for students who display quick and accurate sentence writing. And then we actually see improvement on student writing outcomes. So when students engage in writing fluency, when they can quickly and accurately write sentences and then paragraphs, we do see improvements in overall writing quality. So how readers judge students' writing for organization or convincingness or ideas. And writing fluency tends to be a key predictor on later success for standardized writing measures such as end of the year statewide assessments. Okay, so if sentence writing gradually develops across grade levels, and if some students display difficulty with sentence writing, and that difficulty can have this cascading effect to overall writing development because they'll have to pay attention, active attention to sentence writing instead of these other juicy bits. What are different evidence-based tips that I can share with you? So we're going to take a look at a combination of explicit instruction and fluency practice. So before we start to unpack that, these are sort of what we have seen in different research studies. So myself and some colleagues, we've published, now it would be upwards of about a dozen different studies to where what we see is that before intervention, we sort of see something like this to where we would give students these picture word prompts and then we would ask them to write sentences. And, you can see some things here. So here's a picture of Jane. Looks like student wrote Jane. I think that word is stole. So Jane stole piggy bank. And then here is Gwen planted. So the student in this case is really sort of just copying the picture word or copying the word prompts. There's some basics of sentence structure here, but it's kind of difficult to tell. And this is the same student. So post-intervention after a series of instructional lessons and fluency practice, what we see is, these aren't masterful post Renaissance type sentences by any means, but you can see that this student in a very meaningful way has latched onto the basic building blocks of sentence structure. So we have Miss Rice opened the door, we have a clear capital letter and punctuation. Clear capital letter here. Tom had a tightrope climbing event. I think that's a pretty good sentence here, but that's capital and mark. So we see a measurable improvement on CWS, which is correct writing sequences. And then so we'll unpack what that means. I know education can be like alphabet soup with different acronyms, but we'll unpack that as we move forward today. Okay, so who can benefit? So we've used these instructional techniques, explicit instruction, fluency practice, with studies for students that range from elementary to high school age students with disabilities, writing difficulties. And then prior studies have typically included students who could do the following. So they could handwrite alphabet letters. So their handwriting doesn't need to be perfect, but they need to be able to write with some legibility or enough legibility to where, as a teacher or as a reader, I could tell what they were trying to accomplish. The student needs to be able to spell high frequency words. So all the words do not need to be spelled correctly, but they need to be able to spell some high frequency common words such as had or was or the. The student needs to be able to read connected text. So, in other words, if they have difficulty reading connected text, it's going to be a struggle for them to read back what sentences they wrote. So they need to be able to read at least some connected text. Again, they don't need to be fluent readers, but they just need to be able to read text back to you. And so if a student can handwrite some, not perfect, but some, they can spell some, not perfect, but some, they can read connected text, again, not perfect, but some, and they still struggle to write complete sentences, these are the students that we have typically worked with across research studies. And so I have posted this curriculum for free on my website, so you can get to it by going to this QR code. I will also pop the link in the chat, so it's www.seandatchuk.com. My wife tends to make fun of that website every time I bring it up because it's just my name. It's not the most creative thing I've ever come up with, but it's seandatchuk.com. I'll leave the QR code up there for just another couple seconds. But if you click on the link in the chat or if you go to there, what you'll see is something that looks like this. And so it has contact information. This ribbon right up top here might be over to the left, depending on what your screen resolution is like. But let's say if you click on sentence instruction, you scroll down, there's going to be PDFs that will bring up PDF files that you can download and print right off of your computer. And so here's lesson one. Here's different picture word prompts. Sorry to scroll so fast. I don't mean to give anybody motion sickness. And then there's also some accompanying scripts, so suggested instructional language that we have used in prior studies. And so that's for each one of the lessons. If you go over to sentence practice, you're also going to scroll down. And same thing, you will be able to click on downloadable PDF files. So here is, let's say, practice set 8. If you click on that, here would be 10 different picture word prompts that you can use during practice. So again, these are free on my website. Yeah, when you click on the link, you won't see something that says, what's your credit card number or anything like that. It's just available for free. But as we are going through today's presentation, I'd encourage you to take a look at the website and interact with some of the items on there. Okay, so the items on the website and what we've used in different research studies have really followed these 5 design and delivery steps. The first 3 steps, steps 1, 2, 3, regard the design of the lessons and the design of the materials. And then steps 4 and 5 are the steps that we use during actual instruction or practice. So step 1 is to segment sentence writing into small instructional units. So let's unpack that. So segmenting, just to define it, is when we control how difficult a task may seem for a student by segmenting this overall larger skill into these small instructional formats. And in prior studies, we have used 3 types of formats usually. 1, identify, 2, complete, and 3, generate. So identify is where we have students, we present examples and non-examples of the specific skill, and students identify between that's an example, that's not an example, an example. The second would be complete, to where once students can do that identify step, then they engage in instruction to where they're asked to fill in the blank. So one part of the skill is missing, and then a student has to fill it in. Once students get proficient with that slice, they move on to the last slice of the skill, which is where we have students respond mostly from memory to the prompts. So here would be some examples. So here would be an identify, to where we have students identify parts of a sentence. So Kim jumped high into the air. So the part that names here would be Kim. Here for 3, the small dog chased the cars. The part that names would be the small dog. So once students can identify the parts, they move on to complete. So here is they're looking at a picture word prompt. It says blank sat at a table with a stack of books. So the part that names here would be Dell. So we would fill in Dell. So notice how the complexity of this skill is gradually changing to where this would be quote unquote easier to identify. This is a little bit more difficult to now have to complete. And then finally they would get to generate to where now they see the picture word prompt and they would have to generate a complete sentence. So as you noticed, as I brought up my website and then right here, we use a lot of picture word prompts. And why is that? Well, let's take a step back. So let's say if you were instructing a small group of students and you presented, let's say, this picture word prompt. And so grandma eggs, and we just had students in that small group write to describe that picture word prompt. What we would see is that student one might write, Grandma cooked the eggs. Student two might write, Grandma was making breakfast with eggs. The reason why it's so important that those sentences are pretty similar is that if we are focused in on the basics of a simple sentence here, if we gave feedback to student one saying, "Oh, great job, yeah, that capital. Oh, and then you told me grandma, and then you told me more about grandma cooked the eggs." Student two could look down and go, "Oh, my sentence is pretty similar to that." So our instructional feedback to student one ripples to other students in that small group because we're all describing the same picture. Now, that is a wonderful feature if you're working on these basic building blocks of a simple sentence. Now let's take a look at this other prompt. And there's nothing wrong with this other prompt. This can be a great way to generate ideas. Write about your favorite meal to have in the morning. So student one could write, I don't eat breakfast. Student two could write, I like fresh pancakes, eggs, chocolate milk, donuts. This again is a great way to generate ideas. We want students to make connections to their personal lives. Unfortunately, though, if the focus of this lesson, if it was to provide feedback or provide instruction on the basic building blocks of a simple sentence, when I give feedback to student one, student two could look down at there and go, that has nothing to do with mine. And that is where the problem starts to come into play. Because again, if we want to provide efficient instruction to where the language we're using to describe the basics of a complete sentence ripples and is meaningful to all the students in that group, that's where the picture word prompt comes in real handy here because since everybody's describing that same focal point, everybody's sentences are roughly going to be pretty similar. So picture word prompts are used across these instructional units. So here would be a research-based scope and sequence if you're looking at teaching a simple sentence. So it could go from identify. So students identify the capital letter at the beginning of sentences and a punctuation mark at the end. Once students can identify that, they work on completing. So there's going to be blanks left to where a student might have to add in a capital letter at the beginning and add in a punctuation mark. Then they're going to go to identify to where now they're reading sentences and identifying the two parts of a simple sentence, a part that names and a part that tells more. We'll get to that here soon on why that sort of odd language is used. Then we have complete, so where now after identifying the parts, now students are actively trying to complete to where a fill in the blank is used, pretty similar to something like this, where blank sat at a table with a stack of books, blank drank water from a fountain. Then students can identify, so they underline or circle complete or incomplete sentences, and then finally they can generate writing simple sentences. So in these 6 instructional units, spread out across time, just in a couple days, we can get students to pick up on the basic building blocks of a simple complete sentence. And again, so the curriculum is for free on my website. It has a targeted scope and sequence, so it mainly focuses in on simple sentences. And what we find is that 3 to 6 instructional lessons, each one's about 25 minutes each. What we find is that students can start to latch on to the basic building blocks of a simple sentence, capital letter at the beginning, and punctuation at the end. There's a part that names, which is typically the noun, and a part that tells more, which is typically the verb. And then there's also other curriculum that take this approach. So the expressive writing curriculum by Engelman and Silbert from 2005, it has a much broader scope. So it deals with not only simple sentences, but also paragraphs. That has 50 to 100 lessons, 50 minutes each. If you're interested in launching off from simple sentences and you have luck, I think this curriculum is well worth the investment. But for a more targeted approach, you could use the ones that are on my website as well. The second step would be prepare complementary instructional scripts. So once we segment the sentence writing into these smaller units, then we could really start to think about how are we describing it. So part of explicit instruction is direct, unambiguous communication, words, language from the teacher to the students. So clear, consistent, concise language. I know Anita Archer is talking at the Literacy Symposium. And so she's shout out to Dr. Archer, definitely. But clear, consistent, concise language. And as it applies to sentence writing, what my studies and other studies have done is define sentence writing as naming someone or something. So in this case, Gary, and then tell me more about Gary. Spilled milk. So I think I mentioned this before. I have a 2-year-old at home, so I am very familiar with what Gary's doing right here. But so we use this, which can be at first an awkward definition, but I think you'll find that it makes sense. So we use this definition to define simple sentence writing. So we say simple sentences have two parts. They name someone or something, and then they tell more. So name someone or something, tell more, starts with a capital letter and ends with a punctuation mark. Again, unconventional, but it's more direct. So how we typically define sentence writing would be in parts of speech. And that can be it can become quickly complicated to unpack the vocabulary involved in parts of speech. Parts of speech are important. Students will eventually need to learn it. But what we find is that if a student is having difficulty with sentence writing or are initially learning sentence writing, it can be pretty complicated. So if we say, what's a subject? So we go, okay, well, a simple sentence has a subject and a verb. Well, what's a subject? It's a noun. Well, what's a noun? Well, it's a person, place, thing, or idea. Okay, it also has this verb. Well, what's a verb? It's a predicate. Well, what's a predicate? Well, there's linking verbs, there's action verbs, and then pretty soon, what you hear is sort of a beep, beep, beep in your classroom because you're backing up the vocabulary truck to unpack all these different parts of speech. It's also once you start to a student's initially learning subject verb, you can also get into some difficulties with other parts of speech, such as gerunds, to where, technically run is an action verb, but running can also be a subject. So it becomes very confusing very quickly. So what we do in instructional lessons is we use this direct, when you are writing a sentence, you name someone or something. So in this case, Gary, and then tell me more about Gary. And then in this case, spilled milk. So we have step 1, step 2. Now we're up to step 3, to where we wed our segmenting of sentence writing into these smaller instructional units. We wed it with an instructional script that highlights sort of this direct, unambiguous language. And then we select a strategy for active student responding. So student responses, it's going to be important to consider two major considerations. One would be modality. So how students are responding, and then 2 would be the strategy for the responses. So modality will refer to a prompt. And so we sort of provide a prompt, and we want students to respond in both vocal and written language. So throughout the lesson, students are saying their answers or saying their sentences and then also writing them. In theory, this leverages both oral and written language together. So it not only provides students practice with writing, it also provides them with the opportunity to latch on to these incredibly complicated and nuanced rules surrounding English language. And then in practice, students can usually produce vocal responses a lot quicker than writing. So I'm sure you all either have a student now or have had a student to where once they write something, the first draft is the last draft, to where they're very reluctant to engage in further editing. So if you can hear their responses before they write them, that gives them an opportunity to edit before they write. So here we made an example of using both modalities. So let's say if a student is looking at this picture word prompt where it looks like it's in a pizzeria, you have Gina, Peter, Alexis. and then they're filling in they're completing the fill in the blanks here. So blank held a pizza box. So the teacher could say the part that tells more. And the student says held a pizza box. And the teacher says, okay, find the part that names. So blank held a pizza box, find the part that names, and then say the whole sentence. The student could say, Alexis held a pizza box. Great, now write it. So this is the instructor and students are engaged in a constant volley to where they're using their oral language to say the sentences, get used to that sentence structure, and then they're writing it. So then we can pair it with a response strategy. So if you're working one-on-one with a student, that's sort of simple enough to where you can just simply have a conversation with them. If you're working with a smaller whole group, you could use unison responding. So it's where, again, shout out to Nita Archer and then also Charlie Hughes, Dr. Hughes, a professor emeritus at Penn State University, to where you present an item. So let's say you present this Frank blank, and then you need to find the part that tells more about Fred. You ask a question. So tell me more about Fred. You pause for think time, then you signal for student response, and then following response, you provide some sort of feedback. So here would be an example on how you could use it for identifying complete formats. So Kim jumped high into the air. So it could be that underline, tell me, or read the first sentence to me. Kim jumped high into the air. Get ready to tell me the part that names. And then they could go, Kim. Okay, Kim. And then you could have them underline it. So you're just constantly involved in sort of a volley of having them identify the different parts, having them complete the different parts. When you get to the generate one, this is where it's difficult to have a small group response or a whole group response because the sentence can change slightly. That's where you probably have to call more one-on-one. But at least for these parts, since students will likely have similar, if not the same answer, you can engage in unison responding for identifying complete formats. So here would be an example. So teacher, number 9, get ready to read it to me. And the students could say blank sat at a table with a stack of books. And then the teacher can say that part tells more. So sat at a table with a stack of books. Look at the picture. Get ready to tell me the missing someone or something. Get ready. And they could say Dell. Now say the whole sentence with the missing part. Dell sat at a table with a stack of books. And if you look at my website, these sorts of volleys and sort of the emphasis on not only having students respond vocally, but in writing, it appears throughout the instructional script to where it'll say, okay, so here's, look at number 1 under the picture, who will that sentence name? And then there's expected responses from students. Okay, so steps 1, 2, and 3 were all steps that are used in designing the instructional lessons. And then steps 4 and 5 would be how we now bake that into each lesson. So 4 would be use a model lead test framework. So when a format is introduced, it follows a model lead test. So there's an I do, we do, you do component. So the I do is where teachers show and tell. So it's a vocal and in vocal and written language, how they complete the format. Students respond vocally. So if you look back at this website, so here would be one of the instructional scripts, and it has these goalposts here. So in lesson 1, it says numbers 1 through 4 would be model. So if the lesson is going well, only numbers 1 through 4 would be ones that you would model. And then it has different goalposts or where, okay, so if that's going well, then numbers 5 through 8 would be, we would see this. And so that would line up with these student materials. So here would be lesson 1. So here's 1 through 4. Here's 5 through 8. Here's 9 through 12. Then after the I do, there's the we do. So this is where teacher prompts students through guided practice. And this is where students respond vocally and in writing to high prompt, medium prompt, low prompt. So this refers to the level of assistance the instructor is providing. So in high prompt, instructors are still typically providing some sort of written prompt. Medium, that's fading. And then in low prompt, it's really the instructor is just sort of saying, okay, complete numbers 9 through 12. And then here's a test where students just simply respond in writing. Now, this is an iterative process. Just because I say we use an I do, we do, you do structure doesn't mean regardless of whatever's happening in the lesson, you get down to the you do. It could be that students unfortunately struggle with certain parts, in which case you might need to jump back to the model. So the instructional formats are spread across multiple lessons. So, for example, identifying parts of a simple sentence is done in lesson one, but it also picks back up in lesson two with guided practice. So it's meant to sort of be distributed practice to where students see and have some success on a small strand of it on Monday, and then it reappears later on in smaller chunks on Tuesday. And in sentence instruction, so at the end of each one of these lessons, there's a quick, it's called different things, a curriculum-based assessment, an exit ticket. But basically, at the end of each lesson, there's a quick, short mini quiz, and the goal is 90% accuracy. And what we typically see is that it typically takes students 3 to 6 lessons to get accurate with the basic building blocks of a sentence. And what I mean by that is that when student writes a sentence that has a capital letter, an end mark, there's a part that names, let's say it's Gina, and then a part that tells more. So through pizza dough in the air. So if you look at, so here would be lesson one. So this would be 90% accuracy on filling in the blanks here for the parts. Lesson two would be 90% accuracy on underlining the parts of the sentence and then discriminating between complete or incomplete sentences. And then lesson three would be them actually writing 10 sentences that, again, have the basic building blocks. Now, there still might be some spelling errors. There might be some grammar issues here or there. Maybe subject-verb agreement, there's an issue. But at least for the basic building blocks of capital letter at the beginning, end mark, there's a part that names, there's a part that tells more. What we see 3 to 6 lessons, the vast majority of students that we've worked with have been able to latch on to those basic building blocks. And then finally, we implement a structured practice routine for fluency. So students complete those 3 lessons, and now it's just not enough for them to be accurate. Students need to be able to now complete it efficiently. So be able to have some speed in completing it. Because again, if we think about that simple view of writing, students need to be able to internalize that structure of a simple sentence to where they aren't having to actively look at different parts of their sentence to figure out whether or not it meets all the requirements of a complete sentence. So after explicit instruction, students need deliberate help on speed and efficiency. So if you've ever done, let's say, a repeated reading, repeated math, same principles to where now it's going to be a repeated writing structure. So there are 8 steps for each fluency practice lesson. But before we do that, let's take a look at correct writing sequences, because this is how you're going to provide feedback to students. So when a student writes a sentence, so in this instance, Wanda cleaned the stove, here's the little girl screamed, here would be Dan cut a fish. We score sentences. We could say 1 sentence, 2 sentence, 3 sentence, 3 sentences, but we would actually look in between every sequence and we would score it for a number of different things. So we would try to see whether or not the word is spelled at least phonetically similar. So at least for the sake of practice, it is okay if students apply their knowledge of phonemes to their spelling, if we can tell what they're trying to say. So for instance, if they spell coffee like this instead of like this, we can still sort of tell what they meant. Or if they spell birds like this rather than this, we would still give them credit, at least for practice. We also look to see whether or not it's correct capitalization, so at the beginning of a sentence, or proper nouns, whether punctuation is there, so end punctuation, commas in a series, and if whether the sentences follow rules of standard grammar and make sense. So the reason why we do that is because there's a big difference between, let's say, these 2 sentences. The children played basketball in the cold, windy afternoon, or the dog ran. So when we initially started working on this practice routine with students, what we found is that we said, okay, we just want you to write complete sentences. Students had a history of struggling with writing, so they would write all these very short sentences to try to pick up points. So they go, okay, the dog ran, the bird ran, the cat ran, the lizard ran, the frog ran. So they sort of latched on to the fact they're like, oh, okay, well, my teacher is really happy I'm writing complete sentences, so I can just write all these. Once we shifted to, okay, we're going to look at each individual word and we're going to give you points for adding on other words, students, the complexity, the richness of the sentences started to become unlocked. So there's a big difference between these two sentences that if we scored just complete sentence, technically this is 1 point, and complete sentence, technically number two is 1 point. But if we looked at each individual sequence between the words, that's where sort of the special sauce became unlocked, so to speak. So here would be an example. So Fred looked the window, Jake watered the plants, Tori carried some groceries. So let's actually practice scoring these. So I'm going to drop this Google form into the chat. So if you click on that, or if you use this QR code, what's going to happen is a Google form is going to pop up to where we're going to practice how to score these. So please take a couple seconds to either click on that link or open up the QR code with your phone. Okay. So if you have had luck opening that, what you'll see is something like this. And on my screen, I'm going to put up the rules once again for how to score these. But what I'd like you to do is just write down here, write the number of how many correct writing sequences would happen in this one, would happen in this one, and this one, and then you would click submit. So let me go ahead and bring up those scoring rules. So in between every single sequence, you would see whether or not it's spelled at least phonetically similar, correct capitalization, punctuation, and then each word follows standard rules of grammar. Now, just for the sake of time, I'm only going to put up about 2 minutes for scoring that. So if you can, go ahead and take some time on trying to score that. Uh-oh, looks like that is on there. Okay, here we go. And then I'll be right by the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Just one more minute left. Okay, it's okay if you haven't finished scoring those, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the scores that I had. And I'm going to talk through my scoring here in about 20 seconds. Okie dokie. Sorry to start and stop, everybody. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and share what I have. So on this first one, Fred looked the window. So started with a capital F. So I gave him a point between Fred and looked. That makes sense. Looked something's missing here. So I'm not quite sure what. It's probably Fred looked at the window, but the chain is now broken. So there's an X in between looked and the. So Fred looked between the and window makes sense. And he also gets a they also get a point for ending with an end punctuation mark. So at least for this, I had a score of 4-1. Here we have Jake. Jake watered the plant, and this is where it gets tricky. So doesn't have a capital letter here, and right there, that chain is broken surrounding Jake. So it would actually be errors on both sides. So the fact that that word was incorrect just because there's missing a capital, they wouldn't get points surrounding this. But watered the plant and punctuation mark, they get a score of 3, and they had the 2. Now it's okay. You could be saying, "Oh, I gave the point between Jake and watered." That still makes sense. They're just missing this capital letter. In the grand scheme of things, we would only be off by 1 point, so it's no big deal. I just ask that you would just try to keep consistent with your scoring. Tori carried some groceries. Carried isn't spelled correctly, but I can sort of tell what they meant. So Tori capital, Tori carried some groceries. It's missing an end punctuation mark, so they wouldn't get anything here. Roger sprayed water. Capital N mark, Roger sprayed water. That all makes sense to get 4 points. So that would be an example of scoring for correct writing sequences. So let's jump back into what would that mean for fluency practice? Well, so at the beginning, you would review prior scores, if any. And then, so let's say if on yesterday's scores, the high score was, let's say, 15 correct writing sequences. So you would go, okay, 15, let's try to beat that today. And then you would give students 10 picture word prompts. So you could go onto, let's say, my website. And then, so here would be the sentence practice. And then let's pick out set 11. So here's 10 picture word prompts, 1 through 5 and 6 through 10. 10 picture word prompts. And then we say, okay, yesterday you had a score of 15. There are more picture word prompts here than you can possibly finish. And then we would set a time limit. Prior studies has typically just been 1 to 2 minutes, and that's it. And then once students begin writing, we can start the countdown timer. At the end of the time, we would collect and then collect writing of at least one student to score. So again, all the students are writing towards the same picture word prompts. So their writing tends to be pretty similar. Depending on handwriting speed, we typically see students get through maybe about from 1, 2, or 3. Some students can get through all on the first page. Most students won't make it to the second page, though. So we collect it, and then we actually score it in front of our small group or whole class. So we could go, let's say if a student wrote, let's go back here. So we could say, okay, Fred looked the window, capital. Awesome job remembering the capital letter. You name Fred. Now tell me more about Fred. Look the window. Okay, so you have the N mark here. Fred looked. Oh no, some words missing here between looked and the. Oh, it's probably at. So be sure to write at next time. So we'd actually walk through how to score that. That typically takes about 2 to 3 minutes. So we would praise specific parts. We go, okay, remember capital at the beginning, end mark, part that names, part that tells more. Oh, looks like you might have forgotten this one word. And then we would tell students to flip that writing over so they can't see it. And then we would repeat these steps for a brand new timing. So on this set 11, you have numbers 1 through 10. You also have a brand new copy of the same 10 picture word prompts on this same file. So students would then try again. So they aren't looking at their prior writing sample, they're trying to write it again. And then we would go through that same thing. So we would give them 1 to 2 minutes. They would try to write. And what we typically see is that students tend to write more and more across time. So here would be inside of the Google Drive folder that I shared earlier would be an example of what we typically see students do. So on this first sheet, they had a score of 16 and 2. So that was on their first timing. Their second timing, it was 16 and 1. So getting there. And then their last timing was 18 and 0. So what we see is that students make incremental growth across these timings. And then finally, if you're doing this as a small group or whole group, you can collect that final practice timing. So that way, that gives you a chance to sort of monitor student progress. Okay, so that was the tips to teach. So using this, again, there's 3 to 6 instructional lessons, 25 minutes. That fluency practice, that tends to last only 10 to 15 minutes. On my website, there are 15 different practice sets. And so what we see is that if you do this a couple times a week, roughly in about a month to 2 months, what we see is measurable improvement on student writing outcomes. And then, so within the next 10 minutes, what we're going to take a look at are what are different ways you can assess student progress then. So, one of the best ways of doing it would be to use a curriculum based measurement task or CBM. And so these are typically used for screening, determining students' present level of performance or progress monitoring. Wonderful thing about CBMs is that they're standardized. So, there's standard directions, standard time, standard format. It's efficient. So, just a brief amount of time, couple minutes, and it's instructionally relevant. So, the scores that students show you on these tasks, you can then use to target different skills or slices for instruction. It's low inference, criterion referenced. So we aren't measuring things like IQ. This isn't meant to give you a score on students' age equivalents or anything like that. It's just meant to look at, given these scores, what can we try to predict on their later writing performance? So we'll look at written expression CBM or WE-CBM. And so you'll just need some sort of probe. So a story starter with line paper. If you look on the Google Drive folder that that link that I provided you, there's different story starters from Ames Web that's suitable for cross grade levels. So you could have a story starter. Students just need line paper. You need a stopwatch. You need to ensure a quiet environment. There's also, I'm going to give a plug for the early writing project. There's just some fabulous resources on here, and this is geared towards early elementary grades of K1 and 2. So they sell a binder. It's $80, but it's pre-populated with everything you would need to do curriculum-based measurement for this task and a number of others. It also has instructional lessons, etc. I don't get any money from that. I just think it's a great evidence-based purchase. And then, so once you have that, you would read the directions. So today I want you to write a story. I'm going to read a sentence to you first, and then I want you to compose a short story about what happens. You'll have 1 minute to think about what you'll write, 3 minutes to write. Remember to do your best work. If you don't know how to spell a word, just guess. Are there any questions? So students have that. They would engage in writing, and then we could score it for sentence structure. So we can go through and count the number of sentences written. Now, this can be used to inform instruction, but there aren't really solid norms out there for thinking about what does this mean for screening, so that students should write X number of sentences. We don't have that figured out yet. And so let's see. So the types of sentence structures, just general scoring is whether or not it's a complete sentence. So it begins with a capital letter, has end punctuation mark, has at least one subject, one verb, and there aren't substantial errors to where you can't tell what's happening. And then there's incomplete sentences, so missing one or more of the criteria for complete, or it could be a run-on. There's unfinished sentences, so that's where the time runs out and we can't tell. They might have written a complete sentence, but they just ran out of time. And then there's also connected to the prompt sentences. So some students will basically, where it says, I was talking to my friends when all of a sudden, and they'll just basically write a connecting sentence to that. When all of a sudden I yelled, oh no, we gotta go. It started to rain. So you can just sort of couch that as, well, it was connected. And so we can score for different types of complete sentences. You can, score for simple sentences, complex, compound, complex, compound. Just for today, we're just going to focus in on simple sentences. So basically, if your students wrote this, so Kathy went on the lake to go fishing. She loved going fishing with friend two. Susan brought fishing poles for Kathy too. She loves going fishing with her friends. So let's say if your student wrote that in 3 minutes, Then you could go, okay, there's a complete sentence. Kathy went on the lake to go fishing. She loved going fishing too. There seems to be some sort of grammar issue there, but I can tell that it's a sentence. Susan brought fishing poles for Kathy too. She loves going fishing with her friends. So this is an unfinished sentence. So, maybe they just ran out of time. But so three complete sentences, one unfinished sentence. And then here's a right example. So it was summer, and Janice, Smitty, and Harriet were outside listening to music. Janice used the hula hoop, Smitty danced, and Harriet stood on a chair and blew bubbles. It was a lot of fun until the storm came. Just for the sake of time, we're sort of nearing the end here. I'll go ahead and still drop in the Google form. Here's also the QR code. But if you take a look at that, what you'll see is a Google form that was similar to the other one that's going to ask you how would you score this for complete sentences. And if we were to look at that, what we would see is that it's actually just one long run-on sentence. So it's really missing any end punctuation whatsoever. So that highlights one of the difficulties with trying to keep track of whether or not students are writing more based off the sentences, because it could technically just be all one long run-on incomplete sentence. So you can look at that. And then finally, you could also score for correct writing sequences. Now, there is a wealth of evidence to suggest that correct writing sequences tends to be a pretty psychometrically sound way of scoring not only screeners for detecting writing difficulty, but also a way to progress monitor over time, every week, every other week, student writing performance. And similar to how we scored the practice sheets, it uses similar criteria, except now the words need to be spelled correctly. So we're no longer giving partial credit for a word that sort of sounds similar. Now it needs to be spelled correctly. Looking at the Google Drive folder that I shared, there are different scoring rules that I've shared. So you have the Ames web. Here you have a copy of a scoring guide for correct and incorrect writing sequences. But you can then sort of use that to also score. So here would be capital K, Kathy went on the lake. So went through all here. They get correct writing sequences around the period. She love. So this is where the chain would be broken. So that should probably be she loves going fishing or she loved going fishing. But now, since that love word is missing something grammatically, they would get incorrects around it. Going fishing with, now this one, friend, is misspelled. So since we're using this as a CBM task, we would count that incorrect, unfortunately. So if we were to total all that up, we would get 10 correct here, plus the 6 here, 16, plus the 11, we're up to 27, plus the 1 here, 28. So 28 correct writing sequences. Just for the sake of time, we won't have time to score this together. But what we can do with those scores then is to compare student performance to national norms. So here would be, let's say if you're a fourth grade teacher, at the 50th percentile on average. So we're looking for students to score 38 correct writing sequences by the end of fourth grade. So it allows you that power of interpreting student performance along these norms. So here would be the norms for first grade, second, third, fourth, fifth through eighth. Here's fall, winter, spring at the 50th percentile on average or below average or above average. Now, that's all I had for today, and I'm more than happy to continue this as an ongoing conversation. Again, I can't thank you all enough for wanting to learn about how to support your student sentence writing. I'm happy to form research partnerships, so this would be to where I can help you implement assessment and also the intervention, training, support, data collection. I'm also working on not only having this be handwritten, but typed. So if you're at all interested in that, feel free to shoot me an email. Again, that's my Twitter handle, Sean Datchik. Again, I'm going to be the incoming director for the Iowa Reading Research Center. So this is where you can find all of our great content. But again, thank you all so much for working with me today. I know we're running into my time allotted, so I can stick around for the next 15 minutes to answer any questions you might have. But thank you all so much again.